host, Chase Brown, joined as always by 11 Warriors Deputy Editor Dan Hope and 11 Warriors reporter Andy Anders. We're coming at you a little bit later than we usually do. Our typical slot on Sunday between noon and 1. It had a little bit of an interruption. I think there was a basketball game on campus. Andy, you were there, right? Was it a pretty big game? It seemed like one.
I think it could be classified as a big game. Some would say Ohio State's first major test of the season, which had its hiccups, had its goings on, but they passed, I think. But we're here to talk some football now. That just a little interruption, and we're back.
There was also a women's basketball game on Sunday. Unfortunately, the women's team did not fare as well as the men playing against Notre Dame. Suffered a pretty decisive loss against UConn. But the women's team is going to, as I'm sure, bounce back under Kevin McGuff and Jelani Cambridge. But we are, as Andy mentioned, here to talk about Ohio State football. There was a game on Saturday at the Horseshoe, the penultimate home game. They will play against Rutgers at home on Saturday. But we'll talk about that right after we talk about our sponsor for this show. 11 Warriors Live is brought to you today by First Bank of Central Ohio. It is the official bank of 11 Warriors. From game day to work day, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. Locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Okay, so let's jump into the game action. Ohio State beats UCLA 48-10 in the Horseshoe. This had, some ups and downs is maybe how it's best to briefly describe the game, where Ohio State dominated, yes, but maybe it didn't quite go the way that we all thought. Certainly not the way that we thought at the beginning of the week, the last time that we were all together on this episode of 11 Warriors Live. You would have thought that UCLA would have been at full strength. You would have thought that Ohio State would have been at full strength, but that's not necessarily how it turned out. In this game in particular, there was not only the absence of Carnell Tate, but then there was also Jeremiah Smith playing at less than 100%, and Julian Sand even experiencing a little bit of an injury scare, I guess you could call it. Maybe that's a little bit too severe, but just getting banged up in this game against UCLA. Julian Sand, it's fair to say he didn't have his best performance of the season, and yet he completed 74% of his passes still for 184 yards and 1 touchdown. Again, Carnell Tate did not play in this game, but Jeremiah Smith was on a little bit of a pitch count, played 22 snaps, had 4 catches for 40 yards. That's the overview of their statistics. But Dan, I do want to ask, that's kind of the number one thing people are talking about now, a few days later following this game, is what's the health status of Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, and what do we take away from Tate not playing against UCLA and Jeremiah Smith having not entirely a full game under his belt?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly don't have all the answers right now because Ryan Day was asked about both of their statuses on Tuesday. And as he has been wont to do, particularly when it involves very prominent star players on his team, he did not want to get into specifics about what Jeremiah and Carnell's injuries are, what their statuses are for this upcoming week's game. Said that they're both, working hard to get back on the field, but they're going to take it day to day. I think without getting too far into speculation, it certainly seems to me like it's trending toward neither of them playing this week against Rutgers, which I think, unless they are 100%, they should not play this week against Rutgers, because after this week's game, things ratchet up significantly with Michigan and then hopefully a Big Ten championship game a week later. And so I think if there's any question whatsoever about those guys and their health this week, you sit them out and you hope that both of them will be back on the field against Michigan. But going back to Saturday's game, like you said, I mean, it definitely wasn't Julian Sand's best game, and yet he still completed a higher percentage of his passes than any other quarterback is completing for the season in the FBS this year. He still completed a higher percentage of his passes than any Ohio State quarterback has ever completed in a season in school history. So it was not a bad game by any means for Julian Sand. It just wasn't as great as we've come to expect for the Heisman front runner, or certainly one of them alongside Indiana's Fernando Mendoza. But, all in all, I think you take all of that, you say, okay, the passing game was not the elite unit that it usually is in this game. And Ohio State still won by 38. And that's because Ohio State has the best defense in the country, and its running game also took a huge step forward against UCLA.
I wrote about this in the Monday school session. I know Andy wrote about this in his stock report. It did seem to me like Julian Sand just wasn't quite on the same page, wasn't quite in sync with Ohio State's second team receivers against UCLA. He has such a great rapport with Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. It's hard not to, given how excellent those guys are at playing the receiver position. But when you have a lineup that pretty much regularly consisted of Bryson Rogers, Brandon Inniss, and some mix of Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham, there seemed to be some throws that Julian Sand made, in my view, that those are throws that Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith make, but maybe not those receivers. No knock against them, but those two guys are on a different level. Is that kind of how you saw it, Dan? It just seemed like to me like Julian was maybe a step out of sync with some of those guys, because he doesn't typically throw to those guys throughout most of the games this year.
Yeah, I think it did seem that way. I think particularly with a guy like Mylan Graham, who really hasn't gotten any first team reps, maybe a few here and there, but very few targets with the game on the line before Saturday's game. And then all of a sudden is thrust into a role where he's playing 40 plus snaps. It just seemed like their timing was a little bit off most of the time that Julian was throwing to Mylan. So, that's something that I think you would hope with a full week of practice, likely with Mylan and Bryson taking a lot of first team reps alongside Brandon Inniss this week, that chemistry will get better. You've gotten through one game of it. If you have another week of it here against Rutgers, you would hope that, things are a little bit more in sync. But I would agree with both of you on that point. And even Ryan Day mentioned that on Tuesday as well, that he thought they hadn't gotten a lot of reps together. The chemistry was just a little bit off. And I do think, particularly, later in the game after Jeremiah came out of the game, that led to Julian not being quite as sharp as we've become accustomed to.
An area where Ohio State did look sharp was with its run game. And Andy, I want to ask you about that in particular. Bo Jackson led Ohio State's ball carriers again in this game, 15 carries for 112 yards and 1 touchdown. It was Isaiah West and James Peoples that really stood out to me, though, in their performance. Isaiah West had the second most carries at 8 for 61 yards and a score. James Peoples had the best game of his young Ohio State career, 6 carries, 42 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had the moment of the night, maybe until Lorenzo Styles took back an 100-yard kickoff return, the first in 15 years for an Ohio State football player, first since Jordan Hall in 2010. But the run game in particular was an area where Ohio State looked great. Andy, how much do you give Ohio State credit for that versus UCLA came into this game ranked as one of the worst defenses in college football against the run? How should we kind of balance those two things? Did Ohio State outperform its expectations, or did UCLA kind of meet its subpar standard?
Yeah, I weigh them equally. I think that Ohio State's kind of consistently made incremental improvements on the ground week over week, I feel like, since, some of the midseason where it was at its worst, games like Illinois, Wisconsin, where they kind of struggled to find that groove running the ball consistently. The running backs are playing their best football right now. And I think the missed tackles that you're seeing forced, the cuts that you're seeing made, the improved vision, James Peoples in particular running with not just the hurdle, which is this awesome highlight reel play, right? But in general, he's just hitting the hole with a lot more decisiveness, a lot more force. And I think early in the season, one of his biggest issues we talked about was vision, right? And part of that is just finding that hole, making your cut, and getting upfield, man, and not running into your own linemen. And he's done such a better job of that as the year has gone on. I want to give James Peoples a lot of credit. Maybe I'm biased because I was one of the biggest people riding the James Peoples hype train coming into the year. But I really think he's done a great job of getting more decisive with his running, hitting the hole with power, making some guys miss. And then obviously the hurdle is one of the best highlights of Ohio State's season so far. It was awesome. I can't believe, like, you watch that. I've watched that replay 100 times. I can't believe how high up he got in the air. Like, it was insane. Like, just how does someone jump that high and wall striding, right? So for me, I think this was the best game the running backs altogether have had. I still expect James Peoples to be third in the rotation for like those primary carries behind Bo Jackson and Isaiah West, but he's shown now this game, some other moments he's had in the second half of the season, that I think he does deserve a role out there, especially because I think he's the best pass protecting back they have. And now you have this run threat. Dan and I talked about it before. You don't want to have a guy in there who's only in there to pass protect. So having that rushing threat now on film, teams have to respect it more, that there's a balance. CJ Donaldson, too, will still expect really to see him in situational modes. It's like Ohio State, it's been decades since they actually had a role for four guys out of the backfield. That's like some old, that was the basis of offenses back in the 60s and 70s, and before the forward pass had really evolved at all in a lot of places, and certainly at Ohio State back in the T formation days. But in the 80s and 90s, they had some backfield rotations even as some passing games came along. It just didn't feel like you could have four backs in the modern era and really get all of them involved. But I think Ohio State's kind of finding a way, especially as they have these games where they're running the ball more. And I think that'll be the case against Rutgers this week. I mentioned giving equal credence to the fact that UCLA is a really bad run defense, because they are a really bad run defense. The only worst run defense in the Big Ten is Rutgers, who is the worst run defense in the country. 6.6 yards allowed per carry this year, which is dead last in the nation, a whole yard more per carry than the next worst run defense allows at 5.6. So yeah, that's the thing, is like you see these improvements, and we've seen it in years past. I'm trying to think back. There have been seasons where Ohio State maybe had some run game struggles as the year progressed, and then you get some games down the stretch against weaker Big Ten foes where it looks good and it looks great, and then you hit that Michigan game and the run game is just kaput again. Like it's happened in years past. It happened last year in parts. Obviously, the run game picked up again in the playoffs, but like that's the real test that's on the horizon. Unfortunately, you don't get another look against an actual quality run defense until you play Michigan. And we'll see how that needs to be. I think Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith's availability is going to kind of play a factor into how much you worry about the run game clicking on all cylinders, because we've talked about it before. Ohio State needs to be willing to lead on the pass if that's what it has to do in that game. Does the run game then, So, but I think as far as the backs go, you actually start to feel really confident about Ohio State's running back rotation as it stands right now, the way those guys have looked. You look at the yards after contact numbers, they've been great the back half of the season as a whole. I think this last game, they were great again. Some of James Peoples' best in that area, which he gets a lot of them for that hurdle. I think that it's like immediately 10 yards after contact there. I still have concerns on the offensive line when it comes to run blocking. And so many of the problems with UCLA's defensive front can mask the issues that they've just had all year in terms of miscommunications, breakdowns technically, breakdowns in assignments. Luke Montgomery, I thought, had a really nice bounce back performance because he didn't play all too well, I felt, at Purdue. The rotation at right guard, kind of talked about it before, but ironing out what exactly that rotation looks like between either it's going to be Tager Shabola starting, I think, going forward. And Ryan really hasn't made any sort of there was a battle mentioned earlier in the year, but kind of right now the sense is that he's going to remain the starter there. But then who's that number 2 guy once Josh Padilla comes back? Because they're clearly going to want to split reps. Is it going to be with Joshua Padilla or Gabe Van Sickle, who I thought had a really good game? But again, UCLA's defensive front, right? It's like you have to kind of couch some of these improvements that you saw with the offensive line until you see it against better competition. So unfortunately, the jury kind of stays out for that with me until the Michigan game. But as far as the running backs go, I really think this backfield is hitting its stride.
Andy, did you ever hurdle a defender during your football playing days?
I cannot say I did. We actually did sometimes as for fun. We would run Oklahoma, or when we ran Oklahoma drill in high school, I would line up as the running back just like for a play or two, because every offensive lineman that's ever played secretly thinks they can be a running back. But I would just truck over some of the defenders sometimes, right? And so our quarterback that year was actually playing defensive back too. Small high school guys play both ways. And one time I broke through the line on an Oklahoma drill, and I was expecting just to plow over him, and he dove right at my ankles and took me out. And I was like, man, I should have hurdled. Man, I should have hurdled. So that's my one near hurdle story. Unfortunately, I didn't think to hit the Y button in that instance.
I could tell you, but my lone attempt at doing hurdles and anything was when I did the decathlon in high school, and it did not go well.
I never had to hurdle. I was a basketball and baseball player, so I don't know if anyone has ever hurdled anyone on a basketball court. Certainly jumped over them to dunk. I think about LeBron doing that a few times throughout his career. I do want to mention one last time as we kind of come to a close about the UCLA game. Lorenzo Styles Jr. had that 100-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. The Styles bros definitely had a great game. Sonny Styles led the team in tackles with 7 and had a tackle for loss. One quick note I just got to make is how does Lorenzo Styles Jr. not win Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week? You think that's kind of just a shoe-in, a layup? Ohio State player becomes the first Ohio State player in 15 years to take a kickoff all the way for a touchdown. And yet he loses it to a UCLA kicker that made field goals from 40 and 24 yards. No disrespect to the USC kicker, but I just think that Lorenzo Styles, you got to reward him for making history here at Ohio State. It's a very difficult place to become, a player that can etch their names in the history books. Because now we're going to have to wait until 2040 for the next kickoff return for touchdown. And we're all going to be talking about Lorenzo Styles Jr. But
I will point out too that neither of the field goals were even like game winning, like go ahead, like they weren't like big field goals.
But like, I mean, I feel like if it would have been like a 50-yarder, sure, but like you got to give it to the kickoff return touchdown over a 40-yard field goal.
I don't understand it. Maybe they only look at kickers and punters for that. I don't know.
Dan, let me take us on transitioning to Ryan Day's press conference from Tuesday. I asked you earlier about how we should assess Tate's absence and Smith's pitch count against UCLA. But Ryan Day, when he was asked about both of their statuses for this week against Rutgers, he said that he won't give an update officially as to both what they're dealing with and if they will be available on Saturday. But he did say that both Tate and Smith are in great spirits, that the medical staff is working hard, and that they are both working hard to get back onto the field. It seems like there is kind of a discourse, a discussion happening, whether it's on our forums or whether it's on social media, that people aren't exactly thrilled with how Ryan Day is describing their injury statuses. And it's almost seeming as if a lot of people are trending toward anxiety about Carnell Tate maybe being done for the year. Is Jeremiah Smith going to be at 100% for the Michigan game? There seems to be a lot of rumors swirling around what's happening. In your best assessment and your best description, how should we take Day's comments today, and how should we then project forward these two receivers' availabilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because I think everybody wants to try to read between the lines and figure out what exactly that means. But I think that's hard to do because this has been Ryan Day's MO for several years now, is that he doesn't like getting into specifics about injuries, especially when it's like a week to week thing. We've seen him confirm like season ending injuries in the past, and he didn't do that. So I think that's important context in terms of the whole Carnell Tate discourse is, everything he said is, these guys are going to be back. It's just it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think, probably some of what's caused some anxiety is when Carnell Tate missed the Purdue game, Ryan Day comes out after a game and says, he could have played if we needed him. Now he's kind of being more vague about it. I think that could be as simple as something pops up before the game. They're not really doing full testing and all that. It's kind of more, you're doing a quick evaluation and then you have to make a decision. Whereas then you get back to Columbus, you're running tests on him and stuff. Maybe you find something that's a little bit more concerning and you say, okay, we need to slow down. We need to take a step back and make sure that we let this fully heal before we get him back out there on the field. In terms of Jeremiah Smith, I mean, you'd have to think if it was something that they felt like he could have made that injury worse by playing against UCLA that they wouldn't have put him out there for that game. Now, he was pretty clearly limping after he left the game. I was surprised he played personally, because being down on the field before the game and just watching him in warmups, he wasn't moving poorly, but you could see him grimacing, like as he was running, as he was doing different drills. And so I was a little surprised that he played at all in that game. And, that's going to be one of those things. I think when people bring up, like, the Jackson Smith and Jigba thing, they think back of how he tried to come back twice too soon from his injury. Both times he re-aggravates the injury, and then he ends up getting shut down for the season. I think that's kind of some of the anxiety here of Jeremiah. It's like, by playing in that game, did he make it worse? Now, Ryan Day, he was asked point blank about that, and he said, not that I know of, when asked if Jeremiah had done something to aggravate that injury. So if we take him at his word, Jeremiah is not worse off now than he was going into Saturday's game. But it was clear on Saturday he was definitely somewhere well below 100%, even though he made a one-handed catch on the fourth play of the game, which shows you how spectacular he is. But, it is clear that he's not 100%. And so, I think it's going to be one of those things where, unfortunately, until they're back on the field and playing, there's just going to kind of be a mystery about it, because Ryan Day's not going to come out and say, this is the exact timeline for when we expect these guys to be back. But, going back to what I said earlier, to me, based on how vague he was, because usually if he expects a guy to play, Ryan Day will say, yeah, we expect him to have a full week of practice. And he didn't say that about Carnell and Jeremiah. So we'll see if his answer changes at all when he inevitably gets asked about it during his lightning round tomorrow, or even on his radio show on Thursday. But as of now, my read on it would be, I don't expect Carnell Tate or Jeremiah Smith to play this week against Rutgers. Beyond that, I'm not going to speculate at this point.
I don't know if this is going to come off as a hot take, but this is just my personal opinion when it comes to injuries. When you're Ohio State, to me, it shouldn't matter whether an opponent knows even the most specific details of what your star player's injuries are. I understand why Ryan Day would choose not to share those details. There is part of it where if your star player has a sprained ankle, then your opponent is going to only target your star player's sprained ankle every time they make the tackle. And you don't want to risk even more further injury to that star player. But I've always appreciated coaches like Mike Tomlin or Sean McVay that when you ask them about specific injuries, they're going to give you 100% God's honest truth about what that player is dealing with. And those two coaches in particular are going to win the football game regardless. So it does always surprise me when Ryan Day isn't as forthright with some of the injuries that Ohio State's players might experience, because I think Ohio State, regardless of who is on the field, should be still expected to win the games. I even think about Michigan in the past couple of years being without some of its best stars, and still Ohio State couldn't get the job done. Right? Blake Corum didn't play in last year's Michigan game. Colston Loveland didn't play in last year's Michigan game. Will Johnson didn't play in last year's Michigan game. And still, Ohio State found a way to lose a game when they were favored by 21 points. I think it's a matter of less than just injuries and their advancement and how healthy these guys are, and just being straight up honest about what these guys are dealing with. That's just my personal opinion on it. I have always wondered why Ryan Day wouldn't be more forthright with it, but I don't know. Am I expecting too much out of him and his injury updates, or is that just something that is that what you guys think? Do you guys also agree with that take?
Yeah, I think for me, my response would be, what does Ohio State gain by being transparent, right? It's like, yeah, it's cool that Mike Tomlin and Sean McVay do that. And I personally would love if Ryan Day went down to the nitty gritty and gave me all the details as a reporter, right? That would be best for business, best for me to write about. I would love that. But all you're doing from the team perspective is giving the other team intel about who's healthy, who's not, who they should prepare for, who they shouldn't. If And look, we saw it last year. Northwestern had a player turn Jeremiah Smith's ankle on the bottom of a pile. Like Clemson, what some of the dirty stuff they did in like the 2016 game, you go back. Like teams, players will use injury information against you in dirty ways, underhanded ways. It's goes back decades in this game. It's not just an Ohio State thing. So from Ryan Day's perspective, I think you get rewarded for being less transparent about it. That's just the unfortunate truth of the matter. It would be nice to know exactly who and what's going on as it pertains to injuries, but I just don't think Ryan sees the benefit of it from that outward facing perspective. So outside of the availability report that Ohio State's pretty much required to give 2 hours before kickoff, but isn't always the most transparent information either.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does annoy some fans. There's no doubt about that. But I think from the team perspective, there's nothing to be gained by being super transparent. And that's, I think, just how Ryan sees it.
My opinion would be the Big Ten should adopt what the SEC's put into place, which is more of an NFL style participation report. I believe it's 3 days before the game. They have to put out an availability report in terms of, who's out, who's doubtful, who's questionable. And then they give daily updates leading up to 90 minutes before the game. So that would be my stance is, there's several things like that across college football where it's like all the big conferences should have uniform policies. I would like to see the Big Ten adopt that policy, because if that was to be the case, then Ohio State would have no choice but to be more transparent, at least, even if it's not specific ailments, they would have to at least be more transparent in terms of who's going to play, who's not going to play, who's maybe not going to play. And that would give, for one, it would give us more information, but two, more importantly, it would put everyone on the same playing field there, because every Big Ten team would have to abide by that policy. And therefore, neither team would have a specific advantage or disadvantage by disclosing that information.
Yeah, I think that would be smart, because there is a part of me that I feel bad for Carnell Tate. I felt bad for Jackson Smith and Jigba a couple of years ago when this narrative is building about him as a player, and there's fans who are coming out and saying, well, he quit on the team. And we don't know if that was true. We don't have any information. I would definitely agree.
He tried to come back twice. The problem was he didn't quit.
I agree. I agree with you on that. And it just felt to me like, because we didn't have more information about his injury and people didn't know about the depth of it and how bad it probably got, that you are still going to have Ohio State fans who will probably take to their grave that Jackson Smith and Jigba quit on that 2022 team. And because of it, there are some people who ask, well, if they had Jackson Smith and Jigba available for the entire season, does that team go on to win the national championship? They only had a 1-point loss in the Peach Bowl against Georgia. I'm assuming JSN makes more than a 1-point difference for Ohio State.
The best receiver in the NFL right now.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so, I think that having some more transparency there is something that I want. I think it's something that fans want. I don't think that we're going to go to the entire opposite side of this, where Ryan Day is going to explicitly share every detail. But I do think that Dan brings up probably a best case scenario solution where teams can still be a little bit mum on it, but also can give us some more frequent updates just to let us know what the status of a player might be. One of the updates that Ryan Day did give, this was last week, was on Joshua Padilla, who had missed the Purdue game. And Ryan Day had seemed confident that either Padilla was going to return for the UCLA game, or if he did not return, would then be back for the Rutgers game. I don't believe he was asked specifically about Padilla in Tuesday's press conference. Dan, you might be looking. Did he mention that at all?
Somebody mentioned somebody kind of gave him the out of I don't know if you want to get into specifics about it, but mentioned kind of hinted at trying to get an answer and didn't get an answer. So it's still up in the air on that one as well.
So with Padilla, if he is available, that puts Ohio State in a position where there would potentially be 3 players who are vying for reps at the right guard position between the traditional starter and Tegra Shabola. But Gabe Van Sickle was a player who actually played more reps against UCLA than Tegra Shabola did. He would also be another guy. And then Joshua Padilla is someone that you could throw into that mix. With those three players available, though, Ryan Day did say Tuesday that he would probably want to keep that rotation, if there is one, to two guys. Andy, you just wrote about this for 11 Warriors. There's an article on our website right now that you can go read, maybe while you're listening to this show. Can you give us some context as to what that rotation could look like and maybe what Ryan Day is hoping to get out of that right guard position? It seems like the one spot we've been talking about for a few weeks here as where Ohio State is looking for more consistency.
Right. We've talked about it, but I think, certainly Ryan Day has talked about it. It keeps coming up in press conferences because of the different iterations we keep seeing in the lineup with that. And it was very interesting to see Dave Van Sickle play more snaps than Tegra Shabola. And that's even if you remove the snaps he played with the second team at the end of the game, Gabe Van Sickle did. When the first team was in, it was 33 snaps Gabe Van Sickle, 26 snaps Tegra Shabola. So that tells you that, look, this kid's made a real push. It'd be one thing if he did the Padilla thing that they've done a lot of the year where Josh comes in on the third series, maybe plays like he started playing more before he got hurt, but a lot of times it was just like 1 or 2 series a game. This, Gabe, I don't think Josh Padilla never played more snaps than Tegra in a game. Like that never happened. So I think when I first saw the rotation before I saw the snap counts, I was like, okay, they want to rotate at right guard no matter who that second guy is, assuming they're at least somewhat game capable, because they think that's what enables Tegra to play his best. Like we saw the lapses against Purdue when he was at a higher snap count. I think they were more frequent. And we talked about there were other problems on the offensive line in that game, but point stands, I think Tegra's at his best when he has that relief consistently. However, seeing the snap counts and Gabe Van Sickle plays more, they clearly think something of Gabe Van Sickle. And Ryan kind of touched on that both in his roundtable show appearance on Monday and at today's press conference. Talked about you can see the talent. He's got power, which I agree with. I think Gabe Van Sickle's a pretty mauling run blocker. It's, again, a case of it was UCLA. I've said it already, the defensive front, how much stock can you put into that performance? I've liked what I've seen from Padilla in his limited snaps. Problem is we just haven't seen a lot of either guy to know just how they compare to Tegra over a larger sample size. Because Tegra still has his flashes of good play. As much as I criticize the guy, as much as we all have criticized the guy, beat wide throughout this season, I do want to say that Tegra, he starts for a reason. The talent has always been there with Tegra. It's just that lack of consistency that has been so infuriating, frankly, with him. So I think that's why this rotation is going to stay a thing. It's going to stay split between two guys, and the question becomes who are those two guys. And I think one of them will stay Tegra. I think Tegra is going to be the starter the rest of the year. I feel pretty confident about that. I think after coming out of the bye week, there was that competition that felt like there was a bit of a battle between Tegra and Josh. But then after that, anytime a question has come out about Tegra specifically and maybe reconsidering the starter at that position, Day has kind of been a little more emphatic that Tegra is the starter there, but they want to keep splitting reps. So I think Tegra continues to start. And if he's going to be in a rotation, that's wise, because you don't want to take the starting job away from the guy who started 25 games now, I think 26 games for Ohio State, because he's going to lose motivation. That's just natural. So you want to keep him the starter if he's going to be splitting the reps. And then the question is it Padilla, or has Van Sickle made such a great push these last few weeks that maybe he's competing with Padilla to be that second guy once Padilla's back healthy? That's where the conversation lies to me. I think in both instances, it's hard for me to say who's emerging better between them, when we've only seen Van Sickle really play meaningful snaps in this last game against a bad defensive front, and Padilla's sample size really isn't that large either. I'm not at practice every day, right? I think the coaches are definitely in the best position to say who between those two guys, again, assuming the health of Padilla, is the best option to rotate with Tegra. And I think that's where the conversation comes down to, is finding not only who that guy is, but then the best configuration of snaps. Is it a heavier lean on Tegra again? Do we see something more like an even split or even a slightly larger lean on the other guy who isn't Tegra? Like how does that all look?
Yeah, it's a good point that you make about maybe Tegra's motivation. I don't think that Ohio State wants to hinder that in any way possible, but I think they want to more so spark him as because he is the best of the three. I think if you look at him point blank from his makeup and his performance, his longevity, his experience, all those things, Tegra has moments, as Kyle Jones, our film expert, has mentioned, where he looks like an All American right guard. But then he has too many moments where that drop off the floor, he hits that floor rather than reaching that ceiling. And so it seems to me, as you mentioned, Andy, with Day's comments as of late, they know that Tegra has the capability to play at a high level for Ohio State, but they're looking for ways to motivate him to get to that level more consistently. So it will be a situation that we will continue to monitor, particularly this week against Rutgers, as they prepare then for the biggest game of their regular season against Michigan in Ann Arbor. One last thing about Dave's press conference today is Ohio State. In my time covering Ohio State, actually, they have not made the Big Ten championship game. I started covering Ohio State in 2021. This also coincides with Ohio State's losing streak to Michigan, which is the direct correlation as to why the Buckeyes did not make the Big Ten championship game. So I have not covered a game.
I thought you were going to say you covering Ohio State was the direct correlation between Ohio State and Michigan.
We're getting close. We're getting close. If it happens again this year, Jason might have to make some decisions. But Ohio State hasn't made the Big Ten championship game since 2020. And Ryan Day had a great comment, great quote today about that being a big motivator for the Buckeyes. He was saying that every Saturday is an opportunity to get to Indianapolis. It's an opportunity where this team wants to get to Indy because they don't have anybody on the team who has been there. And so in a time when we are seemingly valuing the conference championship games less and less year after year, Ohio State's head coach comes out and says, no, that is one of our primary motivations, is to get to Indianapolis, win a conference championship, because it's something that they haven't done since 2020. Dan, this motivation to get to the Big Ten championship game, is it something that, we can see then motivating Ohio State going into this weekend against Rutgers, and then also on top of all the things that are going to be motivating Ohio State against Michigan, could this be something that Ohio State uses as yet another thing to get them to Indianapolis a couple of weeks from now?
Well, I think it is a very real source of motivation because of what Ryan Day said. Nobody on this team has been to Indy. I mean, you have guys on this team that, they got in there, 2022. I mean, it was probably even more pressing last year for the guys who came in 2021. But even in 2022, those guys like, Sonny Styles, the seniors that are going to be honored on Saturday, they came into Ohio State at a time when the expectation was to go play in a Big Ten championship game every year. And now you have guys like Sonny Styles and Caden Curry and, whoever else is going, even, juniors, guys like, Caleb Downs hasn't played as a his whole career at Ohio State, but a Carnell Tate or an Arvell Reese, guys who are probably playing their last year at Ohio State. It's now or never to get that chance to go play for a Big Ten championship game. So I think it is a very real motivator. I think it's still something that matters to this team. I know this has been a popular point of discourse in our 11 Warriors Slack about, how much does the Big Ten championship game matter? Should conference championship games still be a thing? Is it time to get rid of them because they don't carry as much weight in the 12-team playoff? I think those are all valid conversations, but I do think for the here and now, like this is something that matters to this team. Like they want a Big Ten championship ring. Like they want to be able to call themselves Big Ten champions. All of that said, I also think the biggest reason why Ryan Day was so emphatic about it today was because that is the tangible thing that's on the line right now. I mean, Ohio State realistically could lose to Rutgers and Michigan, and it's probably still in the college football playoff. It's not something you want to do, but realistically, you're still probably in the college football playoff. the college football playoff, at least making it. I mean, you want to be the number one seed in the college football playoff, but just making the CFP, that can no longer be a primary motivator the next couple of weeks because you're already pretty much in it. The thing that's actually on the line this week in particular is Big Ten championship game, because just one loss, you get into a tiebreaker situation. I have not looked into those tiebreakers. I hope I don't have to look into those tiebreakers, but I know that, I mean, it really would only matter if they lose this week, because if they lose next week to Michigan, they both have one loss. You already know right there they're not going to have the tiebreaker. So it's really moot after this week. But point is, that's the thing that's on the line this week, is making sure that you're going to get to that Big Ten championship game. So I think there was a reason for Ryan Day, because he didn't get asked specifically about the Big Ten championship game. He brought that up. So I think there was a reason for him to bring that up today. And I'm sure he's talking about a lot with his players, but I do think it is also a very real source of motivation for his team.
A thought that occurred to me while you were speaking, Dan, is that Michigan currently is the last undefeated national champion in college football. And I remember when they won that championship, there was a very common take that Michigan was going to be the last undefeated national champion in college football history, because who else could win 15 games in a season? If Ohio State beats Michigan, makes it to the Big Ten title game, wins the Big Ten title, they would then have to win 3 games to win a national championship, which would put them not only as the most recent undefeated national champion in college football, but a 16-0 undefeated national champion, 1 game more than their rival from Ann Arbor, which I don't think that's on Ryan Day's mind, but that would be something that we could for sure talk about if Ohio State does then go the distance after beating Michigan, beating what we would assume is going to be Indiana. But again, we haven't looked into the tiebreakers. I think their spot is all but guaranteed. They have to beat Purdue to get there. It's going to be something where Indiana, barring disaster, is going to be in Indianapolis. But I do think that's got to be some motivation, right? Like, I think that's got to be some motivation for Ohio State, is to get there and to maybe even become an undefeated national champion. Let's transition as we end this episode to some of our fan questions. I want to encourage anyone who's watching on YouTube and Facebook to drop some questions into the chat, as we are going to dive in now to some questions from our forum, some of our readers who submitted their questions early. This is a good one that kicked us off in the forum, and I'll ask this to Andy. What team out there does Ohio State most not want to see in the college football playoffs when they get there? Who is the opponent that Ohio State does not want to draw?
It's a good question, and it's like hard for me to because I think Ohio State is clearly the best team in the country right now, and there's not one team that I'm sitting there like, well, they match up super poorly with these guys. You need a really good defensive front to kind of match like what you feel like could be the one positional weakness for Ohio State right now, which is the offensive line. So someone with a really strong defensive front, someone with balance on the offensive side of the football. Like, you can't be one dimensional against this defense and hope to have much success, any success, etc. How good it's been. You have to be able to be a threat with both the run and the pass. I think 3 teams that stick out to me probably are Georgia, Oregon, and Notre Dame. And I'm kind of like leaving Indiana out of the discussion, not because I don't think they're clearly the second best team in the country. They are, but I think like a lot of it's going to get settled in the Big Ten title game. Could they rematch in the college football playoff? Yeah, but I'm kind of thinking like external threats, right? Like just kind of where my mind is at. I think Notre Dame has looked really strong the backstretch of this season. They have a defensive line and an effort, a style of physicality that I think could maybe create some problems, maybe make the great game grimy and interesting. I think Oregon, when they get healthy at the receiver position, is a dangerous team. I know like the Indiana loss, they've had some other like games where they kind of played with their food a little bit, but to me, I think Oregon still has one of the most talented rosters in the country, especially when healthy, and has balance on offense that I think could challenge Ohio State in some regards. And then Georgia is just like, Georgia has really rounded into form as the year has gone on. They had some early trepidations to start the year, but this last performance against Texas in particular was especially good. Kirby Smart's essentially said it's been like his favorite team to coach because they uh, they're just a really coachable team and they're really about the right things. And I think it's paid dividends in terms of like when you watch that team and how it's developed over the course of the year and the level they're getting to now. Gunnar Stockton's a fun player. Like I think there's some threats that Georgia prevents, and they're always going to have a great defensive front. Like again, to me, like I think an essential ingredient for trying to challenge this Ohio State team this year is having that great defensive front. So, um, to me, I'd probably put Georgia and Notre Dame at the top of the list for that, and then Oregon right behind them as far as external threats. And again, just kind of excluding Indiana from the conversation there for the sake of they play in the Big Ten title game, and we'll see how it goes there.
Another team I would throw in there is Texas Tech, because when you were
that's what I was thinking.
When you were talking, when you were explaining like what the team would be that would be a threat to Ohio State, Texas Tech was the first team that came to mind for me. They've got the number one run defense in the country. They've got the best pass rusher in the country in David Bailey. They've got Arvell Reese supporters about to come after me, but probably the best linebacker in the country in Jacob Rodriguez. It's a really good Texas Tech team. I mean, I think Texas Tech kind of has that, like, you kind of think of them historically as like the Mike Leach air raid team. This is a really good. I mean, if there was a deep, I think Ohio State's defense is the best in the country. But if you were going to take a team that could rival that right now, it's Texas Tech, and they, I think they're better defensively than they are offensively, but they're also ranked fourth in the country in scoring offense. So that's another team. I think they don't have the name brand appeal of some of those teams that Andy mentioned, but I think they're another dangerous team in the CFP.
Yeah, Texas Tech SP Plus has them as a number one offense and the number 4 defense in the country. Stop rate, they're number 1 in stop rate as well. Jacob Rodriguez, they were trying to build his Heisman campaign on Saturday. They brought him in for a wildcat rushing touchdown at the goal line to build his Heisman campaign. You guys see that?
I did not.
They brought him in. He faked a handoff and ran in a touchdown for them to try. They're trying to build a Heisman campaign for him. And then even as Dan mentioned, he is definitely someone that is going to contend with Arvell Reese for the Buckeyes Award this season. Definitely a team that I think is one Ohio State will be mindful of on the CFP draw. Let's go to another question from Ziploc 007 in our forum that says, according to SP Plus, the best team on Ohio State's schedule, past or future, is not Texas or Washington or even Michigan. It's Penn State. It's crazy to consider a team this close to beating Indiana, Oregon, and Iowa a quality win. Excuse me. Is it crazy to consider a team this close to beating Indiana, Oregon, and Iowa a quality win? Dan, we had talked about maybe a couple of weeks ago, we were like, maybe UCLA is going to be the biggest challenge for Ohio State. It did, in my estimation, end up being Penn State because of the talent that they had on both sides of the ball. So I don't think it's crazy for Ohio State to consider it a quality win, even if that Penn State team is now sitting, I believe, 4-6 on the year. They still have NFL talent on the roster.
Well, and I think the biggest thing there, to Ziploc 007's point, is Penn State has lost 6 games, but all of its other 5 losses were 1-score games. Ohio State's the only team that dominated Penn State, that pulled away and completely took the game over against Penn State. I mean, Penn State came very close to beating Indiana, very close to beating Oregon, and those are 2 likely college football playoff teams. So, yeah, I mean, I think, like, if you're trying to sell it in terms of like a resume,
quality loss.
Yeah, I also think that the argument in large part, because I saw that comment, was based on S&P rankings and Penn State being like higher than a lot of the other teams Ohio State has played in S&P. So
yeah, I think Penn State is a talented team, and I think what SP Plus tries to do, it tends to be a predictive measure in terms of how likely is a team to be able to beat another team. So I think I think it's fair to say, like, I mean, again, like, I believe Penn State's favored against Nebraska this week. So I think, Penn State, the team they were supposed to be, is a better team than what its record is. I think if Penn State is like the trump card you're trying to use to like make an argument in favor of Ohio State being battle tested or whatnot, I think that's a tough sell just because of Penn State's record. But I think when you compare Ohio State's performance against Penn State to how other teams have performed against Penn State, it's an impressive performance by the Buckeyes.
Mm-hmm. Ohio State should have played Penn State closer, though, Dan. And then Julian Sands should have had a come from behind win, leading his team to a victory for the Heisman narrative.
Ohio State got a big win over the preseason number 2.
That's right.
That's right.
I got a comment from Scuba Steve. He's the 12th Warrior. Got to thank you, Scuba Steve, for being a part of our club, 11 Warriors, and should use that probably as an opportunity to shout out our 11 Warriors who are part of just building our website. We really rely on our 12th Warriors for powering our website, for keeping a staff that is interested and engaged in keeping Ohio State content fresh on our website. So we do always thank them for their contributions. Their question is about a string of commitments in the past 2 weeks that puts Ohio State's class in 2026 at 28 members. That was something that we had prepped for this episode about the 2026 class. Ohio State in total has landed 13 commitments since September 21st of the 2026 class. That includes 3-star offensive tackle Landry Breed. That includes 3-star safety Kamari Bing. We have 4-star cornerback Jay Timmons, 3-star offensive lineman Mason Wilhelm, 5-star defensive tackle, I believe 4-star defensive tackle Emmanuel Ruffin, Legend Bay. There is just a list of recruits going down the line of people who are adding to Ohio State's class. And where does this class realistically land in total recruits is the question from Scuba Steve. Dan, where do you think Ohio State's going to end up? There are some classes that have well into the 30s for this upcoming cycle. Does Ohio State continue adding more booms here in the future?
I mean, it's certainly possible because, I mean, you just think about guys who were on campus this past weekend. There's still 2 official visitors from this past weekend, CJ Brona at cornerback and Darian McKinley at defensive tackle, that are 2 more potential additions to this class. I would guess it probably lands somewhere right around the 30 mark, which we're getting close to. So not out of a question that it goes above that, but you also think about, okay, you've got 1 more week left of home games, official visitors. We're only 2 weeks away from signing day. So I would say if I was to put a number right now, I'd probably go right at 30. I'd probably say they get 2 more guys and it ends at an even 30.
Got a question from our YouTube chat from Jalen Montgomery. I'll ask this to you, Andy, do you think we'll see Ohio State start to take it up another notch? It seems like particularly on defense, they're getting a little bored. Just seems like they were playing up a notch against Penn State. Could we see them maybe turn it loose? Not maybe against Rutgers this weekend, but when we get to the Michigan game, will we see an Ohio State team that takes it up another notch on offense and on defense?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jalen. I think, for me, if that's what playing board looks like, then I hope Ohio State plays board every game. UCLA didn't cross midfield on offense until 2 minutes left of the third quarter, I believe it was. The defense has been dominant all year. I think, yes, it maybe like part of that is they're not being as aggressive. Maybe they're not like unleashing all the different creative blitzes. UCLA was doing a ton of quick passes. Nico Iamaleava not being in the game. They know they had a massive disadvantage on the offensive line, right? Entered the game one of the worst sack allowing offensive lines in the country. So they wanted to get the ball out quick, like really quick time to throws in this game for UCLA's passing offense. So you just didn't see as many of those negative plays because UCLA wasn't generating opportunities for them. But yeah, the defense was dominant until that last drive of the third quarter UCLA had where Devin Sanchez, like he got burnt a couple times, had some freshman moments. They were up big. Maybe Ohio State does let the foot off the gas pedal a little bit in that situation. I think that's natural when you are dominating teams and being boring, like you said, right? I think, that sort of thing, if you can keep generating 3 and outs and 4 and outs and not letting offenses really get anything going, then I think you take that defense too. Like it's not always gonna, have the chance to be flashy. Offenses have to kind of either make a mistake or call certain plays, design certain things. They're going to let you make those big sacks, tackles for loss, interceptions, those kinds of things. And I think what Ohio State did was kind of dominate UCLA so thoroughly that it felt like there wasn't one real standout. There weren't a lot of flashy moments that kind of stand out in the brain. I think later on, yes, they will have some of those moments when like teams that are more talent equated, like Michigan or Indiana or the college football playoff, those teams are going to try and go tit for tat, drop back for some deep passes, do some of the things where, big plays can happen on either side of the ball. And then maybe you see some of that excitement. But yeah, I mean, sometimes dominance can be boring. I definitely hear what you're saying there. And maybe the energy isn't quite as there for a defense when it's like 2 yard gain, 2 yard gain, incomplete pass, punt kind of a thing, rather than a sack or an interception that's ending a drive.
A question from GOJ in our YouTube chat. Does Matt Patricia entertain NFL, DC, or head coaching jobs if Ohio State wins the national championship? I'll start with my take on this. It's something that kind of has struck me this season in particular, and I'm not commenting on necessarily the intentions of these two coaches, but I did think that last year it was interesting that on Tuesdays we always got Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles on Tuesday press conferences. Very rarely did we have a Tuesday where we didn't get all three coordinators. And as I look back on that, I see those comments, those quotes that were being posted about Kelly and about Knowles now as kind of a leveraging point for those two coaches to get jobs elsewhere. Chip Kelly was always in front of the microphone to then go and get his job with the Las Vegas Raiders. Jim Knowles was always in front of the microphone, giving him an opportunity to then move on to Penn State. I'm not saying that's why they did it, but I do think that it helps you to have your name in the media frequently, to have people talking about you, to build up a narrative. It has struck me that we very rarely talk to Matt Patricia. It doesn't seem like
or
he
any
really
assistant coaches this year.
Or-
I don't think we've talked to a
Yeah.
single assistant coach in like 2 months.
Yeah. But on Patricia specifically, I would think that if he had a strong desire to get back to the NFL, that he would be promoting himself a heck of a lot more than he is. He does seem very content just leading this defense, continuing to develop relationships with his players and his coaching staff. Something that Ryan Day mentions frequently is how great of a job Patricia has done with relationship building. And it does seem too that when he's been asked about his experience at Ohio State, is that he loves it and his family loves it. He has young kids who seem to love the game day atmosphere at Ohio Stadium. They love traveling to go watch their dad coach the Buckeyes. And it does seem like Matt Patricia is having as good a time coaching Ohio State's defense as you can. So never say never, or as Parker Fleming, a friend of the program, will say, not a denial. If he gets asked about it, maybe he won't explicitly say that he isn't entertaining jobs with the NFL. But it does seem to me like Matt Patricia really enjoys being in Columbus. And it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up being the coordinator for another year. That's just kind of how I see it.
That's how I see it too. And I mean, to your point, if Matt Patricia wanted to be speaking to the media more regularly, I'm sure he wouldn't be prevented from doing so. I mean, he's
Right.
leading the best defense in the country. I would think if he went to Ryan Day and said, hey, I want to talk to the media this week, I don't think Ryan Day would be stopping him from doing that. So, that's an interesting observation on your part. But yeah, I agree. I mean, you don't know because, I mean, I will be honest. If you had asked me at this time a year ago, I would have said I thought Chip Kelly would be back for another year because he seemed very happy at Ohio State. And then we find out shortly after the year that it had pretty much always been a one-year plan and that he always had intentions of going to the NFL. Also, regarding Chip Kelly, if Matt Patricia gets offered the kind of money that Chip Kelly got to go coach for the Las Vegas Raiders, that might be hard to turn down. I mean, I do think that Matt Patricia, if he wants to stay at Ohio State, will get a significant raise. I think he will be making more than $3 million next year if he stays at Ohio State. Will he be making $5 million? Probably not. That would be unprecedented as of now for a college coordinator. So that could be a factor. But you could also look at Chip Kelly's situation the other way. I mean, Chip Kelly might not be the coordinator in Las Vegas much longer. I mean, they're having a terrible season. And I was thinking about that as I was watching the Monday Night Football game last night. I'm like, I wonder if Chip is having any second thoughts. Maybe not because of that money, but you could be at Ohio State right now chasing a second straight national championship, and instead you're coaching one of the worst teams and one of the worst offenses, for that matter, in the NFL, with an offensive line that's the worst in the NFL. And so I do wonder, like, if you're Chip Kelly, do you have any second thoughts? Like, man, maybe I should have stuck around and chased another national championship with my guy Ryan Day. And it does seem like Matt Patricia is very happy. So I certainly don't rule anything out. Like, at the end of the day, this is a business, and he may get an offer that is too good for him to pass up. I do think that the bigger threat to Ohio State for Matt Patricia would be an NFL defensive coordinator job than a head coaching job. I think he's far more likely to be targeted for those jobs because of the fact that, when he was with the Detroit Lions, his head coaching experience there did not go well. Granted, he seems to be a new man. And so do I think that he's capable potentially of being a better head coach now, even at the collegiate level, than he was as the Detroit Lions head coach? I think that's certainly possible, but I don't think it's particularly likely that he's going to be a top candidate for any head coaching jobs this year. So I think the biggest threat would be if he wants to go back to the NFL, and if an NFL team really wants him. And he's certainly done a good job of making himself an appealing candidate for the NFL this year. But I'm with you. If I had to pick right now, I would predict that Matt Patricia will be back at Ohio State for another year.
We're at about an hour. We also have a little bit of breaking news. Ohio State just landed a commitment from 4-star interior offensive lineman Brody McNeil. So, Dan, your prediction of Ohio State landing 30 commitments is only one away.
That's 2027. So
2027. Okay, so next year, maybe they'll get to 30 then too. Brody McNeil is committed to Ohio State. So we're going to go cover that. You guys make sure that you read the article once we post it. And then we'll continue to keep you covered with all of the Ohio State football content this week. Ohio State plays Rutgers at noon on Saturday. We will be back to our traditional noon structure on Sunday with 11 Warriors Live. And as always, we wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. I've been Chase Brown, joined by Dan Hope, and